Thanks for coming, everybody. I didn't know how many people were going to come, and this is my first opportunity to learn about Honors Presents, and it seems like an awesome system. Can I ask, just to get a little idea of who you all are, how many of you are freshmen? Okay, quite a few. Is that all, everybody? Are there any sophomores in here? Yeah, and juniors? Okay, yeah, and then a couple seniors? All right, we got a little bit of everybody, that's great. Okay, so today, as you can see, we're going to talk about an interesting culture in an organization when preparing for a concert feels like stepping into a cage fight. And it's about something called masculinity contest cultures in the brass section. Emily and others who've been in my class know that I play the trombone, and it's a really important part of my identity, even though I haven't played my trombone since I quit the Bozeman Symphony Orchestra, and that was like 6 years ago. In fact, I'm not even sure where it is. If people ask me who I am, I would talk about playing the trombone and being a trombone player. It kind of reminds me of, I'm half Korean, and when I went to Korea and I met some cousins, one cousin in particular, his identity was, I am a car painter, and that is the only thing he could say in English is, I paint cars, I am a car painter. So akin to that, I am a trombone player. And my idea for this paper kind of came at a confluence of three events. And this is what made me really interested in this topic. And the first event was the realization that my experience as a trombone player. Does anyone play the trombone, by the way, or is anyone playing music in here? Okay, so you know that, like, when people say, oh, you're a musician, what do you play? They guess that I play the flute or the violin. No one ever says, you must play the tuba, or you must play the trombone, because there's kind of these gendered expectations about what type of instrument you play. So when my dad was my band director, and he played the trombone. And that's how I ended up playing the trombone. He said it was my choice, I could play whatever I wanted, but if I played the trombone, I'd make him happy. And I was like, all right, I'm a pleaser. And then I was really grateful that I played the trombone, and I got to college and I was on a music scholarship, and I walk in a band, and I'm the only girl in the entire back row. It's a low brass section, it's just me. And I could hear cuss word, we got a girl, we got an effing girl, was basically what they would say. Very loudly, I could hear them. And I was just like, oh, it's me, realizing that evidently that's a bad thing. And I realized that at that time I developed some behaviors and some attitudes that shape who I am today. One of them is that I have a potty mouth, and I did that. I was like, I'm tough like a guy, and I started using a lot of curse words, and I drank a lot of beer, and I'll admit that as well, to hang out with the guys. And I'm over that now, luckily. You just eventually, when you get older, you just like, beer doesn't feel good. But that was one thing. It was me realizing that playing the trombone shapes who I am today, and part of that was being in this environment. God, we're recording this, aren't we? Yeah, great. Okay. Being in this environment shaped who I am today. Another event was the passing of a couple of huge names, in the music industry, and the brass music world in particular, and the disturbing stories that came to light revealed how these heroes were predators. And a lot of people were trying to celebrate their legacy as these amazing musicians, while other people who were victims were saying, this person did this to me, this person did this to me, and almost pretty much exclusively it was women coming forward and saying, I was assaulted. And I guess this is where I need to say this is a trigger warning, because there's going to be some sensitive stories that may be triggering for some of you, and so if it gets to be too much, please remove yourself, and I support you in doing that. All right. The last thing was the trends in employment. Another thing that's happening is questions about, is college really worth it? You can go to trade school and be a plumber and make way more than someone who has $50,000 in student loans and is an art major, right? And I'm like, oh, that's what I thought a lot when I hit 6 figures in student loans and I was working on my dissertations. Why am I not a plumber? But I'm really happy with what I've learned. But then I started thinking about, wait, what kind of culture awaits? So now these trades are going to recruit And they want to diversify who works in the trades, right? And we have a shortage because there are a lot of veterans in the trades who are about to retire, and that's going to leave a vacuum of openings in these areas. It's hard to find an electrician in Bozeman, right? It's hard to find a plumber in Bozeman because they're all out building in Yellowstone, and there's fewer of them than there used to be. So they're trying to recruit straight out of high school and saying, forget college, you can just go to the trades and you're going to make a really good living, and we're going to bring in this organization, there's an apprentice system, we're going to trade you up, and it's going to be great. But I'm like, it's 90% men, it's 99% men in these organizations. It is a culture that reflects that male dominance. And how welcoming is that going to be if they don't prepare for having a diversity of people entering that trade and entering that organization? So those three things together made me realize that maybe we can actually learn something from the experiences of women in brass, and maybe through those experiences we can improve the experiences of women who are entering other male-dominated organizations and occupations in other areas. So, interestingly, that we're going to discover that women's experiences in brass sections and classical music can actually be generalizable to technology, to entrepreneurship, to a whole bunch of different organizations and occupations that maybe we wouldn't have thought of. Science. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about what is a masculinity contest culture. We're also going to talk about sport. Oh, it's so dark, I'm sorry. I hope you don't fall asleep, but that's what makes this pop a little bit more. So is that okay? Okay, let me know if you're getting tired. I'll turn the lights back on. For masculinity contest culture norms that are highly correlated with dysfunctional organizations. Classical music organizations as MCCs or masculinity contest cultures. The impact of MCCs on marginalized groups, in this case we're going to be talking about women. When I talk about women, I mean women of all colors and ethnicities. I don't mean just white women. Sometimes when we just say women, the assumption is we're only talking about white women, but I mean all women. And the gender divide is very salient in the context of classical music. And then broader impacts. We're going to dabble in solutions. You're going to see that there's more work to be done there. And then last, we'll close with some Q&A. So, masculinity contest cultures. They're organizations that are depicted by zero-sum game competition. You know what zero-sum game means? There can only be one winner and everyone else is a loser. It's kind of like Ricky Bobby's School of Racing, right? You're not second place, you're just first loser, right? And so there's one winner and it's fierce competition. Winners exhibit stereotypically masculine traits that include emotional toughness, physical stamina, ruthlessness. It's kind of Machiavellian. It often leads to organizational dysfunction and hyper-competition among employees. And this disadvantages everyone, not just the women, but men too. Because let's look at masculinity as a trait, where it goes from low masculinity to high masculinity. And when we're competing to be the most dominant male, that there'll be others who are not perceived as dominant in terms of their maleness, and they will be viewed as losers. And that can be a very off-putting, lonely, and isolating type of environment to work in. So there's 4 norms of MCCs or masculinity contest cultures that correlate with organizational dysfunction. The first one is to show no weakness. And so in this environment, it's important to show confidence to the point of swagger, right? And you never admit to making any mistakes, because that would show vulnerability. And you cannot show vulnerability because this is a contest to see who's the strongest, who's the best. There's also strength and stamina. That leads into the next one. And strength and stamina, we work long hours, and there's other ways of developing our physical prowess, even though this is not athletic, and this applies in occupations that has nothing to do with your physical ability, right? It's not just construction being the strongest. It could be computer programming and being the strongest. And that's very highly valued in masculinity contest cultures. So we're looking for the strongest, the fastest, the people who put in the longest hours. That's what we're looking for. We're also looking for people who put work first. So they prioritize work over family, over children, over everything else. Over medical issues, over any other life issue that might cause an employee to need a break. Needing time away from work demonstrates that you're not committed and you're not strong enough to handle it. Reminds me of a couple years ago, well, several years ago, over a decade ago, when I was a faculty member at University of Melbourne. And one of the heads of, it was the head of the school of the College of Science there, came to a banquet. And he did Q&A with some of the students. I was living in a residential hall. And one of the students asked about his family. And I was like, oh, he's like, yeah, I've got 2 daughters and a son or something. And they're like, oh, how old are they? And he didn't know how old his children were. And this is a sign of masculinity contest culture. That person can compete very well in that type of culture. I just saw a couple of you go, what? And he had no idea because he put work first. Also, it's dog eat dog. So this culture creates this ruthlessness. A ruthless workplace that values the winners, the most masculine, defeating the losers who are the least masculine. If you're a woman, if you're non-binary, if you're a man who doesn't like playing like that, you are going to be a loser in that type of setting. So all of these traits come together to create pressure so that the focus is no longer, let's accomplish the organization's mission and goals. But instead, it's let's prove that I have what it takes. Let's prove my masculinity and why I deserve to be the winner here. So when this happens, endless competitions ensue. The bigger, the harder, the faster, the better. This leads to anxiety, but unspoken anxiety, because you can't share emotions or vulnerability, right? It leads to defensiveness. It undermines cooperation. It erodes psychological safety. It erodes trust. And it also leads to the inability to admit if you aren't sure what you're doing, you're a little uncertain, or if you've made a mistake, which could lead to really big organizational problems down the line. This is not a healthy organization. Masculinity contest cultures do not serve your organization or the people in it. Even if you're winning, it's not helping you. It's not helping you to really succeed and thrive in that organizational setting. So, the question is, do classical music organizations exhibit masculinity contest traits? Well, let's start way back in the beginning, in the 1600s. During the Baroque period is when the first orchestra first came to being. So in the 1600s, and you can see they're dressed kind of like Bach here. And it wasn't until, this is not to scale my timeline clearly. So we're gonna skip all the way to 1930, where Edna Phillips is the first woman who is part of a professional orchestra. It was the Philadelphia Orchestra, and she played the harp, which is a type of instrument that is oftentimes correlated or labeled as a feminine type of instrument. There's a lot of research that talks about gender types and instrument types, by the way. You'll find a lot of research on that. And harp is one of them. And she did really well. She had a long professional career, and it was unheard of. This was the United States. In Europe, it was about 1910 where they had the first woman. From 1600 to about 1910, no women played in professional orchestras. Lots of women were musicians, but it was a sign of good breeding that if you were a musician, it was a sign of a well-behaved, well-cultured young woman to play an instrument. But that was about a hobby, not about a living. Okay, so 1930, and then let's skip to 1970. Less than 6% of women. There's less than 6% of women in American orchestras, or professional American orchestras. So we hadn't made much progress since 1930 with Edna Phillips. So also around time 1970, they instituted blind auditions. So you can see right here, there's a screen between the judges who are assessing this person performing. And because of that screen, they can't see who that person is. They don't know what their gender is. So by instituting blind auditions, we'll jump to 1993. That led to a huge jump. So we went from less than 6% to 20% women in American orchestras. 21% women in American orchestras, which is good. That's better, right? However, 2014 on average, the American orchestras have 37% women. So we went from 1993, another 11 years, and we're not making that much progress because there's at least, actually, there's arguably equal number of women coming out of these institutions as men. And we're not seeing that change in those stats for employment, okay? So, what does this mean? Let's take a look at brass organizations, or the brass section in an orchestra. This is the typical brass section in an orchestra. trying to think if there's any other brass instruments that might appear. Occasionally, maybe a euphonium. Typical orchestra section has 4 trumpets, 4 horns, no, 3 trumpets, 4 horns, 1 tuba, and 3 trombones. I think I mentioned that I played second, did I mention that I played second trombone in the Bozeman Symphony Orchestra? I played second trombone in the Bozeman. And I remember when the conductor called me, I was ticked off that it wasn't first. I was like, what? I'm not first? But I had hardly played for years, and I'm not even a musician. I mean, you know, that's not my main gig anymore. But I still was insulted that I didn't get first. Anyway, so let's look at the stats in the orchestral brass section, and this is in 2014 as well. So for horns has the most gender balance, all right? We have 72% male, 28% female. It gets bleaker from here. The trumpet is 97% male, 3% female. Trombone, 97% male, 3% female. Tuba, a little bit better, but still pretty bad. 95% male, 5% female. Now, part of the problem, some of you are like, how many women play these instruments? Not many. So when you go into school, most of them don't have dads that played the trombone and said, you should play the trombone. You know what I wanted to play? Does anyone see the movie St. Elmo's Fire? It's old. And Rob Lowe plays the saxophone, and he's really handsome back in the 80s. And now when I watch it, I realize he's not even moving his fingers. But because of that, I wanted to play the saxophone. And thank God my dad convinced me to play the trombone. It was a much better fit for me. Also, it was better odds of getting a music scholarship because there's more need for trombone than saxophones in a lot of these groups. So yeah, oftentimes women who are brass instrumentalists talk about how in primary school they were discouraged from playing a man instrument like the trumpet or like the tuba or like, you know, like the trombone. And some of that is, tuba's really big, and the trombone, you need long arms to do that. I remember when I was a little kid, I would use my foot to get up to the long positions. So, it's challenging, but when you're in 6th grade, you're small, man, and then you grow up and you can hit 7th position much better. Anyway, brass sections are almost exclusively male. So that's the situation when it comes to brass sections. And so the one thing about masculinity contest cultures is they tend to occur in their most vicious and dominant form in organizations that are predominantly male and have a large imbalance between male and female, okay? So brass sections give us a pretty good insight into what a masculinity contest culture might look like. So what is the impact of, I think I'm talking really fast, I'm going through these slides really fast. So if you guys are thinking of questions, does anyone have any questions yet? No? If you do, raise your hand. Because I'm talking too fast. You guys are going to be out of here so fast. You're going to be like, good. Time to go back to rendezvous and get some dessert, Okay. So what is the impact of MCCs on marginalized groups? This information came from Frisch, the Frisch's 2022 dissertation research. And she recruited participants for her study from 2 groups. One is the Female Trans Non-Binary Players group on Facebook, and I'm a member of that group. So watching it's a private group, and people post like trigger warning, and looking at how many people have posted horrible personal experiences about being assaulted by teachers, by heroes in their field. When you're working hard and you're researching and you get to meet the best of the best, and they're willing to spend time with you. And then you realize this is a setup. It's like a Harvey Weinstein situation, right? It was shocking to see how many people were posting these things. And it just made me feel like something was itchy in my brain. Like, there's more here than just women being mistreated, not just women, but women being mistreated in this very specific context. This matters for other reasons, for these reasons, and we'll talk about that as well. But on Facebook page, there's over 3,000 brass musicians. There's also the International Women's Brass Conference, which has over 6,000 brass musicians, and there's a great deal of overlap. Like, I would argue a majority of these women are also a member of this. I'm not, but I would be one of the exceptions rather than the rule. Okay, so she asked a whole bunch of interesting questions, survey questions. Let's take a look at some of them. One of the questions says, I have been undermined or disregarded as a result of my gender in the brass section. And as you can see, over 70% agree and strongly agree with that. I've been undermined because of my gender. Being a part of the brass section has forced me to blend in or hold back my opinions at least once and attempts to feel more welcome around my male colleagues. Again, even more, this is over 80% agree or strongly agree with this statement. My negative experiences with colleagues and mentors has changed my outlook in developing a career as a brass musician. Closer to a 50-50 split here, but what that means is 1 in 2 women have thought about walking away from a career where they've devoted all their life to this because of how they've been treated based on gender. I feel added pressure and stress as a woman in the brass section to perform on my instrument at a higher professional level than normal. So performing just as good as the men's not good enough. You have to perform better than the men. And you can see there is this is over 80% agree and strongly agree as well. I find it difficult to be recognized in my leadership role with some of my male colleagues. This is over 70% agree and strongly agree. I've experienced this as well. You might have detected when I said that I was annoyed that I didn't get first chair in the Bozeman Symphony Orchestra. You know who is first chair in the Bozeman Symphony Orchestra? The trombone professor at Montana State University. Her name is Jeannie Little. She's the best trombone instructor I've ever had the honor of working with. And she is one hell of a trombone player, and the Bozeman Symphony Orchestra is doing great things. So I can't speak highly enough about Jeannie and what she's doing over the School of Music and the Bozeman Symphony Orchestra in its current form. Having said that, I used to be first chair in a lot of organizations, particularly when I played a lot and was a music major in undergrad. And I had to deal with a lot of pushback in the beginning, because not only was I the first girl in the back row, but I was the first female section leader maybe that they've ever had at Concordia. And some they just pushed back, and I was like, one, I know I'm better than you. You know that I'm better than you, and also I know what I'm doing. Like, why are you questioning me all the time? And it kind of gave me my first taste of leadership struggle, which was good. It was a really good challenge to have, because people aren't going to just say, "Oh, you have positional authority, I will obey you." You kind of have to deal with a little bit of the social interactions that challenge you, and that was a good thing. But yeah, I could say this also is my experience. Another question: I feel like I've missed out on musical opportunities solely for being a woman. You see, there's a large, at least more than 50% agree. I've never been undermined by my colleagues and mentors. This is what we call a reverse score, right? Because when we're saying strongly agree, that indicates that you've been disadvantaged by gender. Here, we're looking at the disagree, and there is over 80% that disagree and strongly disagree with this question. And this is an example of a woman who represents a giant battle. This is Abby Conan. I'm going to look at my notes here. So Abby was the first female principal brass player of the Munich Philharmonic. This is an orchestra that dates back to 1893. She won the audition for principal trombone in 1980. After winning her position, she was unknowingly contracted into a lower pay group than all the rest of the principals in the orchestra. Principals means first chair. All the rest of the principals across the orchestra who happened to be male. Within 2 years of her work as principal trombone, she was demoted to second trombone. This demotion came as a complete shock to her because she hadn't received any critique of her work as a trombone player or as principal trombone. So she decided to take legal action against the administration of the Munich Philharmonic, and Munich Philharmonic responded saying, the plaintiff does not possess the necessary physical strength to be the leader of the trombone section. She is not in the position to clearly lead the trombone group, and apart from that, she lacks the required empathy to translate the artistic wishes of the general music director. They also said, upon further observation, she was criticized for being too weak, and administration believed she was not physically capable of leading the trombone section. So she believed, they're just attacking me because of my gender. So she went through extensive medical testing to check this out. She had to breathe inside a sealed cabin, and she had blood taken from her ear to see how efficiently her blood absorbed oxygen. She had to blow through numerous machines to measure the capacity of her lungs and the speed at which she could inhale and exhale air. She had to disrobe and let a doctor examine her rib cage and chest. And afterwards, after all this tests, the nurse said, "Are you an athlete?" Because she killed it. She was well above average. Anyway, Though she was undeniably fit for her original position of first trombone, they didn't put her back into that position until 1988. So she gets the job in 1980, she gets demoted in 1982, she goes through all this testing and legal action, and she doesn't get put back into position until 1988. But she continued to be paid less than the other male colleagues that were first in different sections until 1993, where she was promoted to appropriate pay and seniority levels within the orchestra. And it was a horrible legal battle to get there. She had to get like new legal representation and things. And then, she was due back pay. And the orchestra didn't want to do that. One, they didn't want to admit they were wrong. It's masculinity contest culture. We don't admit fallibility and vulnerability and weakness, right? But she finally wins to a certain degree because there was a statute of limitations. So I think she got paid back to the late 80s, I think. They didn't go up from 1980 to 1982, but so the late 80s when she got reinstated as first. And once she got that back pay, she quit. She was like, all right, I won. I'm out. I don't want to be a part of this terrible organization anymore. And I don't blame her. So to this day, she travels the world. She gives lectures. She performs still. She's an amazing performer still. And she... she's a motivational speaker as well. What's kind of interesting is the reason she got this job is because of blind auditions. They didn't see that she was a woman. They didn't say, this woman is awesome, let's give her the job. They obviously had a problem with her gender. So she actually, on her application, she wrote that she was a Mr. Abby Conant. And you're like lying. That's a terminable. You can be terminated for lying on your application. But in this case, they didn't care. Because she's the best player. Like, it was obvious she was the best player. So they're not, you lied, you said you were a man when really you were a woman. I mean, if she said she was a trombone player when she was really, a flute player, yeah, they might have terminated her for misrepresenting what she does. And also, you think Abby, she wrote Mr. Abby Conant, but I think it's Abby, and it could be short for Abraham, so it's a gender neutral name over there. So that's how she even got the job in the first place, is that she was not honest with her gender. So that's Abby, and she is a pioneer. Interestingly also, Abby is one of the people that speaks the truth. Like, she's fought so hard, she's like, I'm not gonna lie. But she's been sued a couple of times for slander by speaking honestly about people that were predators in the field, which is fascinating, which is why you will see in a couple of slides that I do not show names because it's a thing. Okay, so back to Frisch in 2022, she also collected anecdotal data. And several responses indicated that multiple participants had been the victim of sexual assault. Their abusers were mentors and educators, encountered during the participants' time in the brass section, and other participants indicated experiences of sexual harassment in past interactions also with mentors and educators. So, seems like there's a trend here. The Atlantic in 2020 had this article that they published, Classical Music Has a God Status Problem. Does everyone know what we're talking about when we say God status? Some say yes, some say no, so I'm just going to talk through what God says. God status is akin to hero worship, which is excessive admiration for someone. God status involves the treatment of any subject in a particularly grand or exalted manner, and it morphs into kind of like a godlike infallibility in a sense that that person becomes untouchable, right? It's like Harvey Weinstein, after so many Oscars, was godlike in Hollywood. That's why it was such a big deal that he was toppled by the Me Too movement. But here you can see the byline. The Me Too movement has done little to challenge power dynamics in conservatories, and musicians want to know why. I mentioned in the introduction to this talk that a couple of gods or heroes of the brass music world had passed away, and seeing people's responses to that made me think there might be some kind of research here to be done. And in 2018, I think, is it 2018? 2017, there was an article in Slate magazine where the author McSweeney, and this was, again, in the whole Me Too movement, and the author McSweeney examined classical music against 5 norms that were identified by the National Sexual Violence resource center. And these norms give rise to a context in which sexual violence takes place. So these are the 5 norms. And so one norm is norms about women, where they are oppressed, objectified, and limited. The next norm is norms about power, where it's characterized by a very unequal distribution of power. Someone has all of it and others don't have that much of it. Norms about masculinity that are rooted in traditional beliefs about masculinity. So, for example, one of those beliefs might be that men are simply stronger and better capable than women. And that was in 1982 with Abby, but just in the past 2 years, that's what the National Soccer Federation said to the women's US soccer team. That men are, it's documented that men are genetically stronger and faster than women, and therefore it takes more skill and athletic power to perform as a male soccer player than women, and that's why we pay them so much more. So they use that justification a lot. And then there's also norms about privacy, where you have a culture of secrecy, where harassment can take place and no one can talk about it. And then there's norms about violence, and the author here came up with anecdotal evidence to prove the first 4 without a doubt. I would argue that the norm about violence also can be proved with anecdotal evidence, some of it which I've just shared. And that includes a tolerance for aggressive behaviors and blaming victims. So let me show you an example, and this is, actually, I'm not going to show you the example right now. When is that slide coming up? Okay, so at the intersection of all of this is brass music and brass musical sections, all right? Now I'm going to show you this. Okay, so this is a website that people check out, Slip Disc, and it's for brass. And this was after a large name had passed away, and it was in January 2022. This is when I came up with the idea for this study. This industry, and this is a female poster who says, "This industry continues to glorify." You can't read that very well from where you are, can you? Or can you? Did I blow it up? Okay, I'll read it out loud. "This industry continues to glorify people who were known industry-wide to prey on young females with extreme sexual harassment, especially at a time when there was no Me Too movement or help. You took it or you lost your job. Blank may have been a great horn player, but he was not a great human. And I'm dreading the influx of gushing praise that's about to flow about this predator." And this was one post and a tsunami of gushing praise about this predator. And after this person made this post, other people were like, "Thank you, finally someone said it." So we see here norms about privacy and secrecy. We see norms about violence against women. And let's see another norm about violence against women. Right here, this is a male who responded and said, "Women who actively went out of their way to sleep with him is not predatory behavior on his part." So we're victim blaming. Another response immediately after then was, "I knew blank for more than 35 years. I'm unaware of any remotely plausible allegations of sexual harassment. As far as I know, all of his relationships were consensual. If you have any evidence that this is not the case, please provide it." So again, more norms about privacy and secrecy and victim blaming. And lastly, this one fascinated me. Thank you to the previous poster for your courage in defending the offender. So that it just shows that there's this really strong culture where they protect the untouchable heroes, and really doubt the women who are coming forth and telling their stories and their truth. And there's so much of this, and that's what triggered a heck of a lot of posts on the women, bi, trans, non-binary brass group, and just to see all these people coming forward, and how many of them were so triggered by seeing how many people were worshiping these big names who had gotten away with that behavior for decades and decades. So we know that this applies to classical music and especially brass sections, but where else might it apply? Basically, it can apply to any type of organization that has that strong gender imbalance. So, it could include the trades. It could include tech startups, finance tech startups, firefighting, construction, consulting, law enforcement. There are a lot of articles about masculinity contest cultures in law enforcement. And on and on and on. Got Hollywood is for sure a context and an industry for that. And on and on. Any industry with a gap in representation may be at risk. So often when we perceive an imbalance, what we do is like this knee-jerk reaction. Well, let's produce a balance. We should hire more women, right? But does that solve the problem? And this is where we really have to ask the question, does diversity equal inclusiveness and inclusivity? It does not, right? We know that we can have a lot of, I think about, I'm a biracial Montana native. I was born in Missoula and raised in northeastern Montana. And this was my home. I was here till I was 18. And then I left for about 20 years. And when I came back, I've never experienced more culture shock than I did when I moved back to Montana. And it's because everywhere I moved after this, there was more diversity. And maybe some of it was me thinking, oh my God, I'm 18 again, because I haven't been here since I was 18, and some of these insecurities come back with it. I've gone to a lot of therapy, can you tell? But some of it is being an other again, and really standing out, and realizing that I help to contribute to the diversity of this institution that doesn't even collect data on biracial identities and amongst their faculty and staff. We do now. I think they have one or more race, and I'm one of them. And there aren't that many at MSU. So we can have diversity, but that doesn't mean that the people who are here feel included. And for a long time, I really struggled in that way, feeling like I was a part of this community at Montana State University and beyond in Montana. And you know, I've established my peer group, but there are times where that vulnerability comes up again. When something happens, I'm like, what the heck was that about? That person just told me to leave their furniture store and go buy something at Walmart instead. Was that because, why was that, you know? And then eventually I think it's because they think I don't have money, but why would they guess that? I think it's because I look like maybe I come from a background that doesn't have money, you know? And eventually, you know, you get to these places. So yeah, diversity is a long way to say diversity does not necessarily equate inclusion. Okay, you can have a lot of diverse representation who feel miserable in your organization and not included. So the three traditional solutions for people feeling disenfranchised and underrepresented peoples, in particular, unless we're talking women in this place. The first one is fix the women. So this assumes that women lack confidence and skills to succeed in male-dominated domains. And so they just need to be trained in order to adapt and to compete, you know, to get up to snuff here and compete more competitively. The next one is to value the feminine. And that assumes that women have unique qualities to bring to traditionally male domains. And this can lead to interventions that promote the diversity in improving the value of diversity and improving creativity and performance. But it also inadvertently reinforces the stereotypes that are based on gender. Also, oftentimes, like we've seen this in business leadership, for example, with the rise of emotional intelligence. You guys have heard of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is something that is often viewed among female employees and leaders, but it's praised more often than not amongst male employees and leaders. So when women do it, they're like, well, yeah, you do all right for a woman. But when men do it, they're like, awesome, that guy has what it takes. Wow, that's innovative and new. And guys, I hope you don't feel like I'm picking on you. I'm not trying to. I see you as allies who are also getting 750 champ change points today. But I appreciate you being here and listening and nodding your heads. Well, I swear to God, I'm not trying to beat up on you. The last one is to address implicit bias. And this assumes that the bias is accidental, it's unconscious. But a lot of this is pretty intentional, right? Like what happened to Abby Conant? That was intentional bias. Like, she's a woman, she's not strong enough. That's not implicit bias, that's not accidental, that's not, subconscious. That's a very blatant type of bias. So this type of training and intervention and a place where bias is blatant oftentimes exacerbates the incidence of sexual harassment that takes place in those types of organizations. So these don't work. So some questions, and this is where, we're supposedly talking about solutions right now. I'm gonna pose some questions. How do we change the culture and implicit values of an organization before we recruit underrepresented populations into that organization? We're not talking about implicit bias here. I think we're talking about implicit values. I don't think that a lot of masculinity contest cultures say, yeah, we want to destroy everyone and be the one person at the top of that hill and win, 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 even if it hurts the organization overall. I don't think people say, yeah, those are my values, right? So that's the implicit. So how do we address that? And I'm asking you, do you have any ideas?
Can you rephrase the question?
So I think right here, when we see this imbalance, we want to hire more women. But really what we're doing is bringing more women into like a viper pit. It's a culture that is not friendly or welcoming to women. Women will struggle. What's the point in going out of your way to hire women if you're just going to abuse them and basically wear them down till they freak out and quit? So the question is, how do we change the culture of that organization? And how do we change the subconscious masculinity contest culture values before we bring women into the organization? Yeah.
I mean, I'll take a shot.
Wonderful.
Someone's got to be brave. And this kind of stuff comes down from the top.
Yes.
So someone needs to step out and be a leader and show that there's no tolerance for that kind of behavior. And basically, that hopefully starts a trickle down, whether by authority or hopefully more intrinsic motivation to cut that kind of culture out and replace it with a more inclusive one.
Absolutely. Being a leader is going to be really important. In fact, ideally, the person who is the most masculine person in that culture, who can win that contest every time, is going to be the best ally. Because they're going to have the respect of everyone. And they say, this is crap. Do you guys really want to live like this? I'm exhausted and I'm winning. I don't want to do this anymore. Ideally, it's going to be that person. It's going to be a leader who has some kind of power, whether it be a positional authority or whether it be some charismatic social power. They're going to be the ones who move that organization. And that's going to be an important first step. Yeah. Good. Yes?
I feel like taking efforts to build mutual respect between employees and leaders in that organization is important, because I feel like a lot of ignorance happens when people, or a lot of violence and hurtful situations happen when people are just ignorant, and ignorance isn't always the person's fault, but it's kind of their fault, the origin of it might be their fault, but I feel like ignorance of certain issues and certain people really perpetuates a lot of these stereotypes.
Yeah, we have to learn to be accountable for our ignorance, because harmful actions are based in that ignorance, and we have to be accountable for those actions. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Anyone else? You guys, those are two really good thoughts. I'm impressed. Here's another question. How can we cultivate an understanding that masculinity contest culture does not, that MCCs, okay, that's plural. I was like, do I have subject-verb agreement problem here? Okay, does not benefit the organization or the people within it, whether they be male, female, non-binary. So how do we make the implicit values that underlie and perpetuate this contest of being the biggest, the best, the fastest, the strongest, the most extreme? God, that sounds like Bozeman outdoor culture a little, doesn't it? Yeah, that might be another MCC. Okay, so how do we cultivate, how do we make that implicit value explicit and really challenge? Is this what we really want? How do we start doing that? I know you're just stretching. But I'm going to ask you, since you stretched, because it almost looked like you were raising a hand. You can pass if you want. I don't need to put you in the hot seat.
Me?
No, the gentleman in the back with the hat on and shorts. Yes.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that when everybody is so focused on competing against each other, there's really no collaboration within the organization. And so you don't have that spreading of ideas that oftentimes is what benefits organizations and the people in general within the organization most.
I think that whatever you said is probably awesome, but I didn't hear any of it. I'm so sorry. I'm going to come closer. Yeah. Can you say it over again?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that when you're always competing against each other and trying to be better than the other, there's really no collaboration within the organization. And oftentimes that's that collaboration that not only benefits the organization the most, but also the people within that organization. So you actually realize that the people you work with are a lot like you and have this interest in having this as you.
That is wonderful. Yes. And that leads me to, not that slide, but the next slide. I'm going to come back to you on that. Okay, so yeah, organizations really need to take a deep dive and diagnose their culture. Like, we want collaboration, we want teamwork, we want people working together to achieve the goals of our organization. And why do we do this? I always struggle with, I don't know if maybe we talked about it. I had Emily in my 335 class during the pandemic semesters. So did we ever talk about the purpose of an organization? Like to make money, is it to make money or something else? And is money the purpose or is money the sign that you're achieving your goals and your mission?
Yes.
Yeah, and okay, good. I'm glad I talked about that. Oh crap, now I forgot what I was gonna say. So what is the purpose of the organization? And so we need to take a look and take a deeper dive to examine and diagnose our cultures. These efforts need to be led by people who have power in the organization to spark serious change. So the first step is to generate awareness of the masculinity contest and how it creates problems for the organization, like decreasing collaboration, decreasing trust. I'm not going to trust someone that I know is going to throw me under the bus at any moment so that they can be king, of the hill. You remember play that game when you were a kid, King of the Hill? I got knocked down that hill so hard every time, but it was so much fun to try. So, for instance, people tend to attribute sexual harassment to a few bad apples, and they ignore how an organization's culture unleashed, allowed, and maybe even rewarded that misconduct. And this happens all the time. When organizations do not tolerate bullying and harassment, the bad apples are kept in check, and the good apples don't go bad. Have you guys heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment? So Philip Zimbardo has a TED Talk called The Psychology of Evil, and he says, oftentimes when this type of stuff happens, we say, who's responsible? And Zimbardo says that's the wrong question. We're not looking for the bad apples. We're looking for what? It's not who's responsible, but what is responsible for these bad things to happen. And so is it a bad barrel? Or even more, is it a system? Is it bad barrel makers? We're making bad cultures that perpetuate this type of behavior. So this is the slide that we were working toward. We need to show that valuing inclusivity supports the core values and goals and mission of an organization. And we also need to show that eradicating these masculinity contest norms supports the purpose of the organization. That supports your career. It enables more people to succeed together in a way where we can build trust, we can build teams, we can build collaboration. I don't know about you guys, but that's the type of organization I think I do work in right now, and I'm so grateful. I couldn't stand working I have worked in organizations where there was no trust, where it was more contest, and it was miserable. I hated it. Even though I loved the work I did, it was the culture that drove me away. And I don't want anyone to work in that type of organization. I think sometimes people think the study of business is how do we do this? It's not. It's how do we do this? And how do we do this in a way where you can say, I spend most of my conscious hours at a place where I feel good about what I do and I'm not miserable every minute of it. In conclusion, how are we doing on time? I'm taking up more time than I thought. Son of a gun. Okay. Masculinity contest cultures exist in many organizations and industries. It creates dysfunction in organizations, particularly for underrepresented groups, and in this case, particularly for women. And we can learn about MCCs from contexts like brass sections. I mean, when you think brass section, you didn't think, oh my God, it's so applicable to so many industries and jobs and organizations, right? Now, what I'd like to say is that I've given you all the answers that you needed today, but I don't think we're there. I think we're probably left with more questions than answers today. And so I welcome you to ask those questions, and if you can't think of them now, please feel free to contact me, because I'm going to apply for a sabbatical next year on this project. I'm going to keep on working with this. So anyway, thank you guys for coming here and listening to me prattle on, and for your participation. Thanks so much.